Okay. Thank you all for coming. Appreciate it. I'm impressed at how many people made their way from lunch down here to the basement, so thank you all for coming. You passed the first test. My name is Ben Teedy. I'm part of the CEO initiative on Alzheimer's and have been working with the team on the Blood-Based Biomarker Workgroup, and we're really excited to have everybody here today. I think it's a testament to how important this issue is, the number of people that we have in the room. There are still some seats in the front if folks in the back want to come up here. I know, don't worry, it's not scary up here. And we do have an overflow room back by the lunch area, so there is some space up there. There actually will be a few light refreshments up there afterwards as well if you want to head back through the dining area. So if we could go to the next slide. Just to give you a sense of the plan here for today, so I'll share just a little bit of an update on the Blood-Based Biomarker Working Group and what it's been up to over the last year and what we're looking to do in the years ahead. I'll then invite George to come up and share some of his perspectives, and then we're going to have a great discussion with a few panelists about real-world experience with blood-based biomarkers. So next slide. So first off, to talk just broadly about CEOi, as many people know, CEOi was founded several years ago as really the corporate roundtable as part of Us Against Alzheimer's, really serving a purpose of helping connect the patient advocacy work that Us Against Alzheimer's is doing with the business community. And it's been a tremendous, I think, adventure over the last almost decade now, I think, or decade or more, and couldn't do that without the partners that you see represented here. If you go to the next slide, we have a number of partners for the CEOi blood-based biomarker work group, and in particular, we want to call out a few of them: Eisai, Biogen, Lilly, and Gates Ventures, who really spearheaded the accelerated work last year that you're going to hear about today. And we couldn't have done it without their support, so we want to say thank you for that additional support above and beyond the work for the broader partnership. Next slide. In terms of this blood biomarker work group, this was convened a little more than a year ago with a group of over 90 experts from the field. And again, speaking to just how important this issue is, we had a tremendous amount of interest in joining the work group. 90 experts from a number of different institutions representing academia, industry, venture capital, nonprofits, all coming together to drive consensus, which is no easy feat when you have that many voices in the room. But I think, again, is really a testament to the interest in this topic area. If you go to the next slide, I want to thank the work stream leaders in particular. As you'll hear about, the work was divided really into 3 different work streams last year. So the first work stream was really focused on what are the performance standards for blood biomarkers. The second work stream was really focused around implementation, how to get these implemented in clinical practice. And then the third work stream was starting to think about how are we going to do education and awareness work as it relates to blood biomarkers. So an extra thank you to the fearless work stream leads who had the job of corralling and driving consensus. And not pictured here, but I also do want to acknowledge Emily Schaller, who I think is up in the overflow room or maybe on her way back down. But Emily was, for anybody that was part of the work group, knew how instrumental Emily was in driving this forward. So thank you to Emily wherever she is. You could go to the next slide. In terms of what these work groups were focused on a little bit more specifically and where we are today, that first work group, which I mentioned, was really focused on performance standards. We're excited to say that we've developed a consensus manuscript, and that's been submitted to a peer-reviewed journal. It's in peer review right now. For all the academics in the room, you know how painful that process can be. But hopefully we'll be through that shortly and published in the next couple of weeks. The second work stream, we actually have 2 manuscripts coming out of it. And we're looking, I think we have the manuscripts finalized and looking to submit to peer review imminently, so that will be trailing, but not too far away. And the third work stream was, again, really focused on education and awareness, has developed materials, and you'll see where some of those are housed in a little bit, but is going to be the launching pad for the work that we're going to do this year. So next slide. Just to give you a sense of where we think we're going in the years ahead here. So we know that developing these consensus guidelines is essential. We can't really drive the field forward without a good set of recommendations. But ultimately, those recommendations need to reach the people who are going to implement them, and those are our providers. And so the big focus for 2024 is really going to be around education, starting to educate both primary care and secondary providers around blood-based biomarkers. But we also know that we can't stop at education. There's other issues that are going to be relevant to drive adoption. In particular, reimbursement is an area that we're going to start to initiate some work in. And then also, we know that this doesn't stop in the US. And so we see over the next couple of years also expanding this work globally into some priority countries outside the US as well. So that's a little bit of a look of where we're going. If you go to the next slide, just to drill in, and actually if you can just click ahead, you can go one more, thank you. The approach for this year is, as I mentioned, really heavily focused on education. It's going to be grounded in those recommendations from this year or from last year, but we will adapt and evolve as the field continues to evolve. And we want to deliver that education through a mix of continuing medical education, other awareness activities. And we know to do that, we want to work with a number of partners. And so starting off, we have some confirmed work. And again, thank you to Eisai for some of the funding here. Work with the GSA and AAFP societies to survey their members to get a sense of what do they know about blood biomarkers? What are their concerns? What do they see as the barriers? Have they heard about them? That will help really inform our education activities. We have a sponsored symposium coming up in a little more than a week at AAGP. So if anybody is going to be at AAGP, come find us on March 18th for breakfast. And we are launching a dedicated website and working with Us Against Alzheimer's, linking to their site as well. We'll give you a quick preview of that in a second. We have a lot of other additional work in development, and as we secure some additional funding, are going to be launching a more robust continuing medical education program, as I mentioned, and some other activities, again, with similar partners, and you'll see us at additional conferences as well. If you go to the next slide. So we're really excited about today, actually, we are launching a new website, alzbiomarkerhub.org. And this is meant to be a resource for all the great information and materials that are coming out of the work streams. And not only will it house kind of the peer review publications as they come out, but more user-friendly infographics and relatable materials that will be great for providers and other audiences. I see people taking pictures with their phone, which is fantastic. I would be remiss if I didn't note that we ran into a technical glitch this morning, and it doesn't look great on your mobile device. I would just caveat that. It'll be fixed shortly. If you want to go there, I would recommend using your laptop for right now, but we will have that resolved shortly. So never a dull moment. But with that, I will, if we go to the next slide, turn things over to George. I think many of you know George Vradenburg, needs no introduction, but we'll have George share some perspectives, and then we'll bring the panel up.
Thank you, Ben. The work group effort here has been rather extraordinary. The number of people involved, the number of companies involved, and the consensus that has emerged from all of that. So it has been quite a piece of work over the last year. But clearly, only till we drive this into clinical practice, and particularly into primary care, are we going to really make a difference. And so this is really important work as we drive it forward and get it into clinical practice. As we know from the initial launch of Leqembi and Aduhelm, but Leqembi now, and potentially with donanemab, these monoclonal antibodies are challenging. They're challenging for patients. It's tough to get on these products. We have a shortage of neurologists. Primary care really is not yet equipped and probably does not yet have the confidence to think that it could be participating in the diagnostic process. So accompanying all this work will be work that is being done that actually develops a clinical pathway in the health systems. So a sister organization, the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative, has a health system preparedness work group, and Phyllis Farrell, I thought I saw her at lunch. She didn't come down. Shame on her. Has been running that now for a couple of years. That has actually gotten us into health systems to understand exactly how to build some of this diagnostic and detection process into the workflow of health systems. And in the United States, that's a health system by health system kind of problem. It may be different overseas, but in fact, in the United States, it's a big challenge to actually build this in to the workflow workflows of primary care physicians or of neurologists, both of whom are already pretty up to their to capacity. So we have been working with that, and that is a matter of changing business practices inside the health systems. It's a matter of reimbursement, how to make sure that, in fact, primary care or neurologists actually make money on this, or at least that the health systems of which they are a part makes money. How is it that we begin now, we're going to start beginning to develop from Us Against Alzheimer's perspectives, a patient pathway. So if in fact we can use some digital markers at home as an initial screen for, do I have a reason for a problem? If I do, what should I ask my primary care physician? And then on the clinical pathway, what should the primary care physician respond to that? And then see through that pathway whether it's a problem that is diagnosed as Alzheimer's or non-Alzheimer's reason for any particular cognitive concern you have. So we have to build out a lot of infrastructure. The world is not yet used to any of these products, and they are really troubled. Troubled is not the right word. They just lack understanding and capacity of exactly how this is going to work in their health systems. And so we'll be working forward on all of this beyond the blood-based markers to make sure we understand how to build it into clinical practice. And we are now launching a digital cognitive assessment work group that will be structured in parallel to this. That is a bit of Wild West. That is a completely different kind of animal. That is going to move at the speed of Moore's Law and not biology law. And so we're going to see a lot of development out there and a wide variety of digital tools that in fact are going to be helpful to patients potentially, but it's going to be massive confusion for a while. Until we understand what the difference in these digital tools might be to any particular patient or to the care system. So a lot of work over the next couple of years. There will be an effort to really think through whether or not there is a solid basis to ask the United States Preventive Services Task Force to change their guidance on screening. Not yet decided to do that, but there are 5-year cycles in the United States. 2025 is part of that cycle to reconsider their 2020 decision. So at least it's on the agenda for perhaps we start doing some screening. Who do you screen? When do you screen? What's the consequence of screening? All of those kinds of questions over the next few years. So we're building out the infrastructure for hopefully the rest of history, right? How to get the health systems to be able to deal with neurodegenerative diseases. Probably not just related to Alzheimer's as we think through it, because mixed dementias are a significant part, as we've heard here. So it's not just Alzheimer's, it is dementia. And it may be beyond dementia. But nevertheless, we have to be able to have health systems that respond to these kinds of brain diseases in ways that they haven't in the past. So that's just a little more context. So you're going to hear some experts. So I'll ask Ana and Richard. Who else is on my panel? Ana, Robert Perneczky, Ana Pereira from the Icahn School of Medicine, and Robert Perneczky. Is that pronounced it correctly? Yeah, that's right. And Robert Batrla of Eisai. Could maybe we move the chairs over here, more in the middle.
A little closer.
So people can see you. And actually, why don't Richard, you sit there, because that's your picture. Robert,
All right.
Robert in the middle.
Keep that.
Anna on the left, although probably you could tell Anna. So if you would, just as a starter question, your experience with blood-based biomarkers, and a couple sentences about your own background, or educational or institutional, and just a little of your experience with blood-based biomarkers to date.
Great. Thank you so much for inviting me here. I'm a cognitive neurology at Mount Sinai, New York City, and I see a lot of patients with cognitive syndromes in clinic. I also have a laboratory that's studying susceptibility of neurons to Alzheimer's and tau, and I've been really excited and interested in understanding how we're going to implement biofluid biomarkers in clinical practice. I'm also chairing the program's chair for the Alzheimer's associations on the biofluid biomarkers. To answer your question, I think it's a very exciting time. I think both clinicians and patients are really excited to implement blood-based biomarkers in practice. It's something that is already part of the workflow of a clinic. it's a potential for scalability. There is also a potential for less price, less cost than CSF and amyloid PET. So I think this is very exciting. I think in the US, the use of it has depended on states that have been CLIA approved or not so far. And I think, has been really exciting, is for us to understand how, and for clinicians, how and which patients are going to use that for. I think that the two potential ways you can think about it. One is, I think we now are in the era of molecular diagnosis, just like oncology is, cardiovascular has been for a long time. So even just aggregate the clinical data with a molecular data with plasma. And the second, which is part of the work stream A that I've been working with Oscar Hansen and Suzanne Schindler, is used for therapies. Now we have FDA-approved anti-amyloid therapies. How are we going to guide people how to use this? And I think, at least the paper that references under review now, for therapies, anti-amyloid therapies, the threshold, the bar is higher since it's a therapy that has potential side effects and expensive. So for that paper, we are recommending that it should be the sensitivity specificity at least as good as CSF. So basically, a sensitivity at least of 90% and a specificity in a behavioral neurology clinic in the 80s. So to make sure we're making the right decision. Thank you.
Richard?
So I'm a psychiatrist. I'm based in Munich, Germany. I specialize in general adult and geriatric psychiatry. I'm responsible for a department at the University Hospital of the University of Munich. Some experience from working in the NHS from the UK healthcare system. I like to think that Alzheimer's disease is a psychiatric disorder because Alois Alzheimer used to work in our department, but that's just my personal biased view of the situation. We don't have any disease-modifying drugs approved in Europe, but Germany, I believe Austria will be the first countries where would be available as soon as it is approved, which could be very soon, later this year. We don't have any blood biomarkers approved, so that's quite different from the US, I believe. We use a lot of CSF and amyloid PET in particular in our department, but that's a big tertiary referral center, large university hospital. It's a very kind of privileged situation, doesn't reflect the situation in all of the different hospitals in Germany. My personal experience with using blood biomarkers and trying to implement them is from there was Alzheimer's collaborative funded projects. I'm quite grateful for that support. And in the first pilot study, I saw how challenging it is in terms of regulatory approvals, ethical approvals to implement blood-based biomarkers. I like to think that the German healthcare system is pretty good. So we have very good universities, medical schools, lots of neurologists, even more psychiatrists in private practice, great hospitals. What we don't have is an integrated system. So it's not really a healthcare system where there's a very clear patient pathway from GP, a primary care physician, to a neurologist in private practice and then to the hospital. It's pretty much up to the patient. You should go and see your GP first, and the GP should make a referral to a neurologist, and then the neurologist should make a referral to the specialist memory center. But the patient may decide to skip the initial 2 steps and go straight to the memory clinic, which is not very helpful, will increase waiting times. So the lack of this integration is our challenge, I think. And it's also the lack of the motivation of primary care physicians to even think about Alzheimer's disease. They just don't care. If you look at the ICD-10 codes they use, it's all unspecified dementia. They don't diagnose Alzheimer's disease. They don't want to know anything about it. And we need to change that, and that's going to happen hopefully later this year.
How does change happen in the German world, not system, but systems?
Well, as soon as there is a universal healthcare coverage, so as soon as something is approved and covered, the patient, the doctor will use it. So it's less transactional than in the UK and in the US. It's less GP-based than in the UK, so there's more flexibility. But if something is covered by insurance, then you're able to get it. There is no copay. It's less transactional. But it's also the mindset of the primary care physicians that needs to change, I think. And the only motivation that I can see is as soon as these modifying therapies are approved, that will hopefully motivate primary care physicians to do more for Alzheimer's disease and try to use biomarkers and blood-based biomarkers and make referrals. Currently, it's a bit difficult to convince them that that's an important topic.
Assuming one or two disease-modifying therapies are approved, are you optimistic that there will be the use of blood-based biomarkers in your systems?
Yes, I am. I guess I have to be. No, I am. It will. I'm not sure if I see blood-based biomarkers in the near future in primary care. I'd be happy if at the secondary, so general neurologist, general psychiatrist, geriatrician level, they would start to use it, and then it would slowly kind of migrate into primary care. That will be kind of how this should develop in Germany, I think.
Robert.
Richard, yes.
Richard.
Doesn't really matter, does it?
Yes.
It's almost the same name.
Just to add to the German picture, Germany already has the highest rate around the globe, I think, of CSF, 20% or something. Yes. So they are very biomarker savvy. Yeah. So my name is Richard Batrla. I'm currently working as the VP in US Medical Affairs at Eisai. A bit of an anecdote how I came to blood-based biomarkers. So when I joined the industry in '98 in Bayer, they were developing a drug, and we were discussing with colleagues, wouldn't it be amazing to have a blood-based biomarker for Alzheimer? Yeah, that would be the holy grail. And this holy grail prevailed for a long time. So we started at Roche. We had advisory boards at that time. I was told by many of those key opinion leaders that we work with now, at that time they were right. They said, Rich, run. There is nothing, right? We scanned all the literature and all the publication, and it was all just, tested in 20 patients, and yeah, it wasn't really robust. So we came a very long way to here. Even at the advisory board then, we were very cautious of not asking for a biomarker with high sensitivity and specificity, because we knew it's technically not possible yet. What we had at that time was a high sense or spec. Yeah, you can modulate that. So in 2015 we started working on this, and then we're here now, and we have blood-based biomarkers, and we have now, through the help of CEOi, a very clear guidance on how to use triage biomarkers and how to use confirmatory biomarkers and what the performance criteria are. That is a super helpful guidance for the community, and through the leadership of Suzanne Schindler, Oscar Hansen, and all the people that you've seen. It's a very clear picture of how they should be used and how they should be viewed. So now we need to educate on this one. So that's a bit of a history, starting in 1998, talking about this, and landing here, 24, having something wonderful.
So Ana, you're in a big health system.
Yeah.
What are you seeing as the operational challenges to actually use blood-based biomarkers, either in specialist or in primary care, or both?
Yeah, no, this is a great question. Thank you. I think there are several issues that we still need to overcome. One is to establish cutoffs so that we can know, for example, for me as a cognitive neurologist, which patients are clearly positive, clearly negative, and the ones who need to go for spinal tap for CSF or go for amyloid PET. That's one. Second is, as you pointed out, educating physicians, because it's clearly overwhelming for them to understand. Well, first is to come from the general data to the individual, because you are in the clinic looking at patients and the families in the eyes and making a diagnosis, right? So putting together all the information and transforming into that. Third is, as I think people have been talking, is standardizing, getting to standardization of those tests, and eventually getting FDA approval and reimbursement. Because right now, the patients that I'm using in clinic, they're paying out of pockets, and it's not affordable for the majority of the population. I think George pointed out a couple of the two other things I think are critical for us to look forward. One is markers of disease response monitoring. Because right now, if you have amyloid therapies, and I've had patients already on Leqembi, in over a year, we want to know if this patient is really having removal of amyloid or not. And so you have to have, just like in cholesterol, you monitor patients, study them in statin, you need to know if the cholesterol is improving or not. So we need a biomarker, and this is, I think, what the field has to focus as well right now, because I think you have very good sensitive assays and specific, but assays that can allow a physician to monitor. Otherwise, we still have to use amyloid PETs to quantify that. And finally, George pointed out, is co-pathologist. For me, as a behavioral neurologist, I know that there's so much that goes together. I get referrals all the times for patients who have amyloid positivity, but there's a lot more nuances and complexity to these patients with amyloid and Lewy body, but the predominance of the disease that's driving the disease is Lewy body, or combination co-pathology of TD and Lewy body, or patients who are referred for me for Leqembi, I look at the MRI, because the primary care doesn't know how to read an MRI. This white matter lesions consistent with CAA, so this is not the best candidate. So there's a lot of nuances into this, and having markers of co-pathology, and having a lot of studies to understand who is going to respond to those therapies or not, depending on the co-pathology. So we are in a very exciting era, but we still have a lot to learn from those biomarkers and those therapies.
So I'm going to follow up with something, but I just note from what you've described, this is an interaction between academic or researchers on these biomarkers, together with policy. Is it reimbursed? Is it FDA approved? And with health systems. So we have to talk as a community around this. And so that's why patients get into this, because we want all of these elements of the ecosystem to be conversant with each other, because the problems of the academic community that is developing, or the industry that's developing these products, may not know all of the operational characteristics and that has to be overcome. So, and Us Against Alzheimer's is an advocacy organization, so we'll work on the reimbursement problem. We had a little problem last year with Medicare just on covering Leqembi and PET scans, so we've gotten some step down that way, but there's a lot more to do. Do you think standardization is going to be needed? And we can have a lot of different blood tests out there, and doctors are going to be marketed a lot of different blood tests. They're going to have different performance characteristics, and we've given them maybe some performance standards, but how do we need standardization? And if we do need standardization, around what?
Yeah, that's a great question. I completely agree with you. That's true. We need to work together, right? There's so many pieces of the story for us to get there. Government, academics, industry, and be a team together to advance to honestly fulfill patients' needs. There's a tremendous need, particularly now with those disease-modifying therapies on board. I think there's been quite a bit of discussion at the ADDF panel a couple of days ago on standardization or not, and with Henrik Zetterberg, Kai Bleno, and Jeff Dage. I don't know if any of those are here. I think what as a community, people think that right now we are using you can still use individual tests with each lab having your standard and your range, but ultimately the holy grail would be, and I think there's coming up some consensus that phospho-tau217 may be the first one to really come to rigorous standardizations to do just like what happened to cholesterol. So I think maybe phospho-tau217 would be a great start, and I think they were mentioning NFL already has achieved a lot of those standardizations, but for now, they're still okay with each lab having your calibration and your range, but for the future going forward as we advance, given the need right now, but for the future and going forward, so that standardization could be a good way to go.
So Robert, in Europe, ex-United States, we have our own complications in the United States with multiple systems. Sinai doesn't serve all of us, unfortunately. So how is it going to work in Germany? Do you have to wait for approval of a drug? Then you have to wait for the approval of blood tests. And reimbursement is not an issue because you have universal health care, so you have different policy interactions in Germany than we'd have in the United States.
Correct, but the reimbursement may be an issue because there's a reimbursement, and someone has to decide that the drug is reimbursed, and if it's not reimbursed, it doesn't help us that it's approved by EMA. But once it's reimbursed and approved, then it should be available to pretty much
So the
anybody.
approval is by EMA,
and then
the reimbursement by
country
German.
by country reimbursement decision, correct. But can I just quickly come back to your comment about kind of involving everybody in this discussion about the usefulness and how we implement blood-based biomarkers in the healthcare systems. From my discussion with primary care physicians, I don't think that they want to engage in those discussions in Germany and in the UK. They have so many different things to do. They have cancer and diabetes and myocardial infarction, and dementia is just one of the diseases that they're responsible for. They don't want to engage in discussions, I think, that's my feeling, specifically for any of those disorders. And our view as academic clinicians is extremely biased, I think, and I try to reach out and talk to primary care physicians, and I try to use that feedback to shape my own view of the situation, but I don't actually feel their pain, and that must be I don't want to be a GP in Germany. It must be extremely stressful, even worse in the UK probably. So talking to them is not going to change anything, I guess. They need some high-level education about Alzheimer's disease and what it is and why biomarkers are useful. But then they need very clear instructions, I think. So they can't get a biomarker result which has a gray area where they don't know what to do. So they need very clear instructions, cutoffs, even if it's two different cutoffs, they need to know what they have to do when there's an indeterminate kind of, because otherwise the GP reaction is wait and see, and that's what and it makes perfect sense to them, makes perfect sense to me. So clear instructions, I think, is very important. But to be able to do that, we need data from less biased cohorts, I think. So all the information, all the knowledge that we currently have is from biased kind of studies, and we don't have the information that we need from primary care populations. That's what we're trying to do for Germany in the DAC project that I just mentioned. We don't have that currently, I think, so that needs to be improved.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think there are two trust issues in a community. Trust in the performance of the assay, the technical performance, the reliability, the cutoffs, what you mentioned. And then what you mentioned is the trust in the clinical performance, right? And it's not only in a clinical study, but in a real world cohort. And that drives adoption, usually, right? So the trust, like PSA, wherever you do it, Australia, LA, Germany, your PSA value should be comparable, right? So you have to have trust in the technical performance and then in a clinical validity of the result and simplicity of communicating it. Many things get into it. It's like the pre-analytical, robustness of the biomarker. If it degrades slowly after taking it out of the vein, then it's not a viable biomarker. So, and 217 has good properties, so we're getting there, but trust across the community is key for adoption of biomarkers. Yeah. Otherwise, they just shrug their shoulders and say, wait and see. Yeah.
Which, of course, given the fact that we want to go earlier in the course of this disease, is exactly the wrong reaction. So let me try to imagine a world, Robert, to press you a bit, a world which does not now exist, in which we don't try and talk to people that will be given the facts of today, and say we want to create a world in which we would like to exist. What is the possibility of everyone at 65 just automatically getting a blood draw? And the primary care physician may not even have to be involved. As long as the compensation is there and the reimbursement's there, you can take a blood draw in a physician's office. And that blood goes to some lab or some set of labs around a variety of things. I get a cholesterol measure, I get a hypertension, I get all these measures. And another line shows up that shows, you have risk for or some biomarker associated with some dementia. So, that can almost be automated in a real, if in fact we were into the practice of basically doing some screening. Then you have the more complicated element of how to determine what is the response to that in terms of diagnosis of a specific condition that can be treated. But I wonder, how do we get to the world we want to live in rather than the world we're living in today?
So definitely share your vision of these brain health assessments, which are kind of automatically triggered. We're not quite there yet, and that doesn't only require biological markers, I think, so also on the symptom level, that's where we need digital biomarkers, the other work stream. So that's a very complex system, and we have to be very careful, and that will take some time, I think. There are initiatives, so there are several large European Eisai projects, for example, which try to develop exactly this, online cognitive assessments, home-based biomarker sampling, to develop something which may work in certain European countries with the relevant infrastructure. And also think that real-world data collection should be emphasized more. So we have to move away from those biased clinical trials. They're important, they serve their own purpose. But we need practice-based registries, and there are several international registries developing. ALZNet is one of them. We have just launched INRAD during ADPD, now another international Alzheimer's disease registry. And we need to see how the treatments, the biomarkers, the symptoms develop and perform in these actual patient populations, which will be less biased towards Alzheimer's disease or kind of pure Alzheimer's disease than a clinical trial where by design you bias your cohorts. I think that's the next step.
But a primary care physician takes blood draws today for diabetes, for a variety of conditions. Why not just send the same blood off to a lab that will assess for underlying conditions of...
George, are you mentioning someone who is cognitively impaired or asymptomatic? Asymptomatic, yeah. I think we are, in our work stream, I see Michelle laughing, but we are trying to start off with cognitively impaired patients and get them through disease-modifying therapies. I think the few challenges in symptomatic patients, one is we don't have any way to treat them right now except for reducing risk factors, exercise, and other.
That's not irrelevant.
That's not irrelevant. I agree with you. But I think a lot, and also I think Oscar Hansen mentioned in the panel yesterday, for asymptomatic patients, your risk of false positive is higher given the values. But Michelle can speak more to this, and she's working on the primary care work stream. Also have to think a little bit of the situations. I have patients who are asymptomatic and they know they are amyloid positive. They are tremendously anxious. I think you have to think a little bit more globally. And I think since we were starting this is still starting to implement this, we're really starting patients who are cognitively impaired, and so that you have clear criteria for positive predictive value, negative, sensitivity, specificity, because you want to start this the right way and have, as we started with trust, having trust in the community, both patients and the scientific community. So, but we envision potentially a future that in years from now, it may be part of your workup, general checkup, and a physician could check your amyloid status, and if at that time, years from now, we have therapies that can prevent developing Alzheimer's. This is a foreseeable future. I can see your vision for the future, just part of your checkup. When you get there, we're just not there yet.
Michelle.
Sorry, I've been dying to say something. Yes. But one thing
Michelle,
that...
just introduce yourself.
Oh, hi, I'm Michelle Melky. I'm at Wake Forest University and co-chair of Workstream B on implementation. So I've had a great opportunity to talk to a lot of people about this and think through these. One thing that hasn't been brought up yet that I am incredibly concerned about, and this is even more concerning when we think about asymptomatic, is the ethical issues. And this may be, I don't know if this is a US-centric aspect, but this is something that, George, I'd love to talk about going forward, because I think with the working group that you've put up and the connections that you have, this is something that we can do something about. Because there's a concern right now where you have the blood markers, if they go right into the medical records, number one, you have people looking on their dashboard and finding out what the results are, which is a whole nother aspect. But my biggest concern is the long-term care insurance, the impact on life insurance, and the potential impact on disability insurance. And so until we have those protections in place, I think there's a real concern about using these, already in the symptomatic population, but definitely in the asymptomatic population. Because if it rolls out and we end up hurting participants or patients in the process, then there's going to be a negative connotation to this.
I'm going to come back to that question, but I would be curious as to your reaction, Robert, to that.
So I'm not. We shouldn't be interested in screening for amyloid positivity. Is one thing I wanted to say, because it's not actionable. We should try to identify early cases of Alzheimer's disease in individuals who have mild symptoms. I think that's the next big step. We did a survey among clinicians in Europe involved in Alzheimer's disease diagnostics, and we asked them, why don't you use biomarkers more frequently? And lack of actionability was one of the main things that they saw as a barrier. So if I ask GPs to use blood-based biomarkers to screen for amyloid positivity, they will ask me, why should I do that? What's the next step? And I couldn't, maybe someone else in the audience can, I couldn't tell them what to do. I mean, what do you do with an amyloid positive, asymptomatic individual? There's nothing we can offer them. So,
well, not now, but I think it's meant to, but for the future.
In the near future, there will be nothing that we can offer them.
I'm going to come back to that question.
Yeah.
Because we know that a reduction in diabetes, a reduction in hypertension, a reduction in obesity, a reduction in a number of other factors for which you're taking blood tests have an effect on the prevalence of dementia. So where you may not have a treatment for dementia now, you have an ability to reduce dementia in the future by being able to intervene using blood tests on these other conditions.
Absolutely, but you probably don't need p-tau217 to advise your patient to lower their cholesterol levels, to be more physically active. It doesn't add much to the other markers that you have, I think.
I'm just suggesting that, in fact, there are actionable things you can take today to prevent this disease. At least we can ignore all the preventive research that is out there.
But that's absolutely not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's absolutely not what I'm saying.
Any questions from the audience as we go through this? Please just raise your hand and I'll recognize you and you can ask questions at the panel. But I'm going to keep at this. Phyllis. Phyllis Farrell heads the Health System Preparedness Work Group at Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative, ex-Eli Lilly, and now affiliated with just about everybody in the field. So.
We're a family. Thanks, Robert, for doing such a nice job of articulating some of the learnings out of the flagship program. My question is for the working group in general, or the panel, if you guys want to jump in on this. I know that we have found extensive gaps in the ability to implement blood biomarkers in clinical practice in a symptomatic population. So, Anna, to your point, starting there. And those are things around systems not understanding the difference between LDT and IVD and what's a CLIA and how do I come up with the cutoff. And my favorite is I don't even know how to disclose these results. Is the blood biomarker working group going to continue on this path of generating some of that content in a pre-competitive way? Because I know there's a lot of excitement out there right now in these different assays to say which one's best and the academic research to compare them all. And that's all super fun and exciting, I know, scientifically. But as a field, we want them all to win, right? We want as many choices as possible out there that are over the specs, which I think is the first thing that the working group did. But now, are we taking it to the next level to say, is there other pre-competitive medical education that can be done where the whole field benefits rather than each company trying to fight these battles alone?
Phyllis, and thanks for your advocacy for a field which has moved us far along. I think to your point, yes, you want to see a panel. For me as a physician, I have to put a lot of data together. So one thing is for this to go right, I need to know the clinical history. I need to know the neurological exam. I need to do it, cognitive data, brain imaging, and a panel of biomarkers, and putting everything together. It's not just one little single biomarker. I think putting the whole and each biomarker can tell you something different. And I think putting the whole thing in a picture to discover what's going on with the patient and to monitor them, etc. But I completely agree with you. I think there is a huge need for education and we're just starting this off, how to disclose this information to patients and how to work with primary care physicians closely for them to do. I think Michelle is doing all this work, Stream A, on primary care to do the right screening and to refer to someone like me, a behavioral neurologist, who is going to be treating those patients in the right way. So there's a long way to go, but I think that's a great start. I think this work stream, I think what I hear from people is like, from the panel yesterday, including how I feel like, oh, we need guidelines. We are starting here. We are providing guidelines to primary care physicians, to behavioral neurologists, and we need to train more behavioral neurologists to be able to, because we are trained to differentiate the dementias. It's not just amyloid positive that you have Alzheimer's. You could have co-pathologies. You have to know how to read a brain MRI and seeing if this patient, okay, you're amyloid positive. I just saw someone last week who was, she is amyloid positive by CSF, and she actually had amyloid PET, but I look at her brain MRI, oh my gosh, she has amyloid angiopathy, your risk of bleeding is higher, so let's wait a little bit. So I think putting a panel of biomarkers and understanding the whole patient together is the way that you're going to succeed.
I'm intrigued by that notion because we're talking to the cancer community who is trying to develop a panel of biomarkers for cancer risk. And whether or not we can put together a sort of a common panel of Alzheimer's risk and cancer risk together. Because we're going to have to, as a world, go earlier and earlier in these diseases, simply because the chronic disease costs is going to be too massive to treat these people only after symptomatic presentation of cancer or of Alzheimer's. So therefore, we're going to have to go earlier. And if we simply say, gee, there's no treatment today, we're not going to know the risk that our patients are potentially confronting. So the disclosure issue, I think, Michelle's question, then becomes hypersensitive. Do I disclose what degree of risk you might have in the future for diabetes, for cancer, for Alzheimer's? But it should be a problem if you think about patients. Many of us would like to know our risk and be able to find out whether I can do something or whether I should be watching out for treatments that might come down the pike.
Yeah, I love your analogy to oncology because they're 20 years ahead of us. So basically, you do a molecular analysis of a tumor and you know what therapy you're going to do based on molecular diagnosis. I think there's a lot of heterogeneity in Alzheimer's, tons of co-pathologies. We don't have biomarkers in blood for alpha-synuclein, TDP-43, but what I envision as you're looking forward is that based on those biomarkers, you can subdivide those patients better and direct therapy. We have having studies on proteomics and understanding that there's sub-classifications of Alzheimer's patients with different pathologies that may be leading. One is more blood-brain barrier, the other is more in the lysosomals, and targets therapies going forward. But I think, put into perspective, yes, there's a way to go, but we've done tremendous progress. Just think that you guys in pharma started off doing clinical trials without knowing if there was amyloid in the brain, right? And now we know how to at least screen the right patients, and I think the blood biomarkers is going to help tremendously in pre-screening the patients, and then later on going to reduce a lot of cost and just do, instead of doing amyloid PET on everybody, just doing on the ones who pass the blood. And to select patients correctly for therapy, for clinical trials and target engagement. So I think we're moving very fast. It's very exciting. Now you have alpha-synuclein in the CSF. I know those trials we've done, we don't know about alpha-synuclein, if those patients respond to those who have co-pathology of amyloid alpha-synuclein. Do they respond well to therapy? But our next stages, we're going to answer those things. So yeah.
I'm going to ask Richard, because Richard, you have a prevention trial, a secondary prevention trial with this product.
Yes.
So how do you deal with the question of hearing from the health system side? Well, why would we ever talk to people preclinically? Because we're only dealing with symptomatic disease. So how in the heck are you going to deal with the problem of a health system that doesn't want to talk about this preclinically?
And I think, thank you for the question. So I think the unwillingness to talk is based on lack of current data in those patients who are asymptomatic. Once we have positive data, I think the situation will change, because then, to your point, it's actionability, right? You can actually do something. And if we have seen something in the data presented to the public, is that early treatment, patients in the early diseases have a higher benefit of the sustainability of their cognitive performance over a long time. So early treatment will become probably very attractive as a prevention, but only once we have the data. So we're not hopeful of generating much interest before the data is there.
Question from the audience?
Just to add to Richard, yeah, I think clinicians and patients are very eager to know the results of those trials. We don't want to jump the gun. I think there's a lot of promise. Even those monoclonal antibodies already available. We know the patients with the earliest stages with a low amount of tau burden, they do better, right? So we are hoping it's going to continue on this trajectory. But until we have data, we can.
So I'm Yusin Firat. I'm from Amanita Diagnostic. It's a biotech company in France. We are very active since almost 10 years in this domain, and we are trying to bring some innovative products. But I have to say the current problems we have today is to interaction with the regulatory agencies. With FDA, it's perfectly going well. But in Europe, we have really huge problem. Since 18 months, we are asking for an appointment from the notifying body. It's really a headache. So we had some of them, but each of the audits takes months and months for the things really very easy. So it becomes really problematic. The second problem we have, I believe it's the same for all the biotech in Europe at least, is the reimbursement. In fact, contrary to what is said earlier, biomarker and kits, IVD kits are going through the CE marking first. So no interaction except if you have some companion biomarkers together with the drugs, then it goes with the IMI. Otherwise, you have to first go to get the CE marking. So it's just blocked. And when you have the CE marking, it's not finished. In each of the countries, you have a special procedure to get reimbursed. In France, it's really very complex. It's better in Germany, I have to say, and in all other countries. And the last point I would like to comment here, and we need your helps on that. As you might know, when you have a compound drug candidates, when you finish your work and you get FDA approval or EMA, then you have the right at least to sell 10 years exclusivity period. It is not the case at all for IVD products. We have some products we spend really 15 years to develop, and when we have at the end the products, we have only 2 years, sometimes 3 years of exclusivity, where we are trying to get reimbursed. So, and then 20 years later, it's the big pharma or companies in diagnostics taking the product we have developed. So there is really things to do to encourage the biotech companies to invest more.
Can I quickly respond? Just to give an example why I have to respectfully disagree with you that the situation in Germany is better than in France. So just based on the experience from our pilot duck project, where we took blood samples in a community-based settings, and we wanted to communicate the results to the responsible primary care physicians. And we slightly messed up the regulatory application, and we are just not allowed to, even within this research setting, within a research study, to forward the blood-based biomarker results to the GPs, because that may influence their clinical decision-making, therefore it has an impact on patient care, and which is a regulatory problem. We've learned from that. We'll manage to find a solution for the second duck project, but it's very, very tricky in Germany, I think, and it's extremely difficult unless you have an approved product which is reimbursed, then it's not an issue at all. But if you don't have that, it's quite difficult, and you have to know how to convince the authorities to be able to use your product.
So time is running out here, but I must say that from a patient perspective, as 2,000 of us every day can move from mild or early AD to late AD, out of the reach of these drugs, the sense of urgency that we feel, the sense of let's get on with it that we feel is pretty intense. And your story is an example of how it is that at least patients can try and drive a better understanding on the part of government on the one hand, innovators on the other, that there's an interaction here.
There's no priority finding for blood-based biomarkers?
Well, for reasons that you're hearing here, because they don't know how to use them yet, they don't know what the quality is. So all of this has to move forward. Patients cannot allow the current state of affairs to continue. So I want to thank all three of you for the conversation. It's really been very, very good. And thank you all for coming.